Welcome to the University of Georgia for the start of another exciting academic year. As the
Some people are angry.
birthplace of public higher education in America, we stand on
Some people are angry after finding out
more than 230 years of tradition.
Some people are angry after finding out a pipe ran right through graves at the University of Georgia. Experts believe former slaves were buried there.
At some point, they need to just admit that this wasn't done right and then determine what is the proper thing to do.
I mean, Baldwin Hall is sitting on top of a cemetery. And it's a cemetery of the people in this community, in this world, who are the least among us, who had no rights, who had no privileges. We were owned, we were chattel slavery.
Many of America's cities and structures are built on the backs of slave labor. And my guess is that one of the reasons why they don't want to do reparations is because they're afraid it might open Pandora's box.
What it's going to require will take a huge amount of resources and a huge restructuring of the way that the university operates. It's very intimidating for the people who hold power there.
Slavery was no secret. I think we are well aware of that. So it's not about that, it's about how we react today.
When you take a walk through North Campus at the University of Georgia, there's a lot to appreciate. The bushes are pruned, the grass is cut, the trees provide some nice shade. Students, community members, and visitors have a chance to admire the arch, ring the chapel bell, and learn about historic figures and events of UGA's past. It's clear when you walk around this part of campus that this is a place with a significant legacy. What's not clear, however, is the full history of how that legacy was built and how it is maintained today.
Historians make this distinction between societies with slaves and slave societies. And so a society with slaves would be, for example, let's say Massachusetts in 1760. And then there are slave societies, which would include the former Confederate states, and obviously Georgia was among them, where slavery was really the foundation for the entire economy, and that permeated the rest of the society, the culture and social structure and politics and really everything else. So UGA being a public university, I mean, that was part of its very origin.
UGA students, chancellors, and presidents actively participated in slavery as individuals, and the university participated as an institution. Records from the past Board of Trustees minutes show that the university hired slaves from local slave owners to perform a variety of jobs on campus. In the minutes, this is referred to as servant or Negro hire, often amounting to hundreds of dollars per year.
Thinking about it very concretely, slaves cleared the land, they helped construct the buildings, they ensured that the university functioned until the Civil War. So they were omnipresent, and then a lot of the students, if not most of the students, were from wealthy planter families, and they themselves owned slaves. So T.R.R. Cobb, the Cobb House, which is in Athens, Georgia, he He compiled the Georgia Slave Code in the 19th century and was fundamental to the founding of the law school here. Wilson Lumpkin, who was a governor in the 1830s, his house is on South Campus, and in fact most of South Campus was his slave plantation, which he left to the university. So those are just two examples, but there are many, many others.
There are two memorial plaques for African Americans on North Campus. One describes Pleasant Hall as a colorful and traditional bell ringer and janitor, typical in faithfulness and loyalty of many servants of the university. The other plaque, outside of Holmes Hunter Academic Building, salutes the desegregation of the university. Just a few yards away, though, there's another plaque put up in 1991, which refers to the Civil War as the War for Southern Independence. The plaque describes how the university closed during the war, as most of its students entered the Confederate Army. It fails to mention, however, that many students kept their guns when they returned to school and later used them to fight off black residents who demanded equal access to the university. During one confrontation in 1867, UGA professor Patrick Hughes Mell told the black residents that their demand would not be respected because UGA was a white man's college, and if they refused to go home, not one of them would leave campus alive. In 1844, that same Patrick Hughes Mell had written Slavery, a treatise, showing that slavery is neither a moral, political, nor social evil. Mell would later become UGA's chancellor in 1878 and was the first to allow students to form secret societies, which we now know as fraternities. While the history of slavery and segregation is nearly invisible on UGA's campus, former slave owners and segregationists are honored with statues and buildings named after them. Abraham Baldwin, Thomas Bishop, Robert Emery Park, John Milledge, Allen D. Candler, Richard D. Moore, Richard B. Russell, Thomas Ray, Joseph E. Brown, John and Joseph LeConte, Alonzo Church, Mildred Rutherford, and Andrew Lipscomb are just some of the former slave owners and segregationists who are given this distinct honor on UGA's campus.
It's unfair, though, when only one side of history is told and respected. Okay, that's the whole thing. Just tell it all. Right? Just don't neglect to tell part of it, because history is what happened. So you just tell it. But for some reason, we don't want to deal with slavery history, or some folks don't want to deal with it.
When you get casual about history, and this is very important, when you start getting casual about history and all of the dirty work and the terroristic work that went on to building America, when you think it's more important to honor white ancestors than it is to tell the truth, then we just get confused about the truth of the current political economy. That's when black people lose.
In November of 2015, however, this often omitted history was literally unearthed, causing the Athens community to take a deeper look into how the university's history of slavery is still with us today. In December of 2014, the University of Georgia announced an expansion project of Baldwin Hall, a university building located on Jackson Street, adjacent to Jackson Street Cemetery, or as many call it, Old Athens Cemetery. But on November 17, 2015, construction on the project came to an abrupt halt, and construction workers uncovered human remains on the site. Following this uncovering, the university worked with the anthropology department and the appropriate state agencies to handle the remains. The university also announced that the remains were likely people of European descent, according to a hired consultant from the Southeastern Archaeological Services. The next step would be to remove and reinter the remains so the expansion project could resume. But for Fred Smith Sr., Linda Davis, and other longtime residents of Athens, it wasn't that cut and dry.
And so I was reading the newspaper, and it said that UGA was expanding Baldwin Hall, and the construction workers had found some human remains. And of course, that woke me up.
Fred shared with me what was happening over at Baldwin Hall and the fact that remains were buried underneath the parking lot, and it just absolutely frightened me and it appalled me at the time.
For some reason, they felt the need to say that they were not slaves or not of African descent, and that they felt like they were European descent. And based on, I don't know what, but that's the way they was pushing that story. And so to me, I knew that didn't add up, okay? I grew up in the South, right? And I know that that black folks and white folks were not buried together.
I don't know what the architects and engineers knew when they started this addition to Baldwin Hall. What I do know is that it doesn't take a lot of work to figure out that there were African Americans buried there. There are lots of historical records and there are oral histories. There's plenty of material available that would tell us that there are African Americans in that cemetery, and that's aside from the DNA evidence that we later recovered.
Those historical records show that Jackson Street Cemetery, like most cemeteries in the South, was once segregated by race. The white section was on higher ground and was clearly marked, while the black section was on lower ground with graves marked by simple, uninscribed fieldstones, wooden markers, or sometimes only an indentation in the ground. Over the years, the black graves were repeatedly disturbed, while their white neighbors to the north laid peacefully under more sturdy and distinguished monuments. The black graveyard was so vulnerable that it is reported in one old newspaper article that on very rainy days, its bones would be swept out into the street. When Baldwin Hall was built in 1937, it is reported that the convict laborers during the construction discovered 120 wooden boxes of remains. There are reports that more remains were discovered during renovation projects in the 1940s. What happened to these remains is largely unknown. One report says that they were unearthed and thrown over the dump. Another indicates that they were reburied in two 95-foot trenches in a pauper cemetery off Nowhere Road. Another source reports that they were moved to the Athens waterworks. According to a 1978 Red and Black article, the remains were reburied there under the direction of Dean Tate and marked with a large monument. While many have speculated that this report refers to what is now the Bobby Snipes Water Resource Center, this has not been verified. Still, since Ms. Davis became aware of these reports, she has been anxious to identify, to honor, and to connect with the people that were buried in these graves.
So today we're at Athens Avenue, which currently dead ends at the railroad tracks. At one time, this road extended over into what became Athens Riverside Pool. It was a park for colored children back in the 50s and 60s. And we would walk the railroad tracks, all the way over here to Riverside Pool. It became our little shortcut to get over here rather than walking on the streets. And now this area has significance for me because I've learned since the Baldwin Hall incident at the University of Georgia that there is probably a stone here somewhere in this area that has a monument to the slaves that were buried here. I pride myself on being 3 generations from slavery here in Clark County, or Oglethorpe, even in that area, but 2 generations from slavery in Oconee County. And so I am confident that if there are slave burials around here, chances are I'll actually be able to trace my ancestry to a point that I've never been able to explore in the past. I come from survivors, and so I come from somebody who survived that Middle Passage. They didn't end up in a watery grave. They managed to give birth to my grandparents and to my parents, and here I am now. I'm just anxious to connect, anxious to connect.
Shortly after UGA announced the discovery of the remains in 2015, Mr. Smith began making emails and phone calls with UGA officials.
I emailed some UGA officials. I think I talked with a few of them. And so my question was, are these slaves remain?
After contacting several different offices and exchanging emails and phone calls, Mr. Smith finally heard from officials that they would fund the test. Then, about a year later, on March 1st, 2017, the university announced that of the 105 graves discovered, 30 sets of remains contained DNA that was testable, and a vast majority of them were of African descent. This meant that they were almost certainly former slaves. The university also announced that the remains would be reinterred at Oconee Hill Cemetery and marked by a stately granite marker with a memorial ceremony on March 20th. 3 days later, some elders in the African American community held a press conference outside the historic Morton Theater.
There was a press conference where we kind of expressed our concern about the way the UGA was handling it, the fact that they didn't get input from community folks, and because at that time when they announced, that there was 105, that was almost like I personally went into like a grieving moment. You know what I'm saying? And so, but they was like, bang, 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 this is what's gonna happen. And so, and then while we were going through this grieving moment, they, rushed to bury them and then lock us out. That's what happened, And so, when I heard that we had found these bodies, or dug up these bodies, it moved me, because I'm thinking, there's no rest even after this life. You still can't get proper consideration. And it looks like to me, with all our wisdom now with engineering and building, we actually could have left those bodies in place and created a memorial type garden, either around or underneath the development.
Ms. Davis felt especially wronged by the university's decision to reinter the remains at Oconee Hill, another historically segregated cemetery.
Because I'm restoring the Brooklyn Cemetery, I spoke up immediately and said, I want those remains to come to the Brooklyn Cemetery or the Gospel Pilgrim Cemetery, because that's where the descendants are buried. Duh. And so I thought it made perfectly good sense, if you're going to unearth slave remains in Athens, Clarke County, that you would reinter them near their relatives or potential relatives.
On March 7th, the remains were secretly buried at Oconee Hill Cemetery, just 3 days after the press conference at Morton Theater. Mr. Smith had received a tip earlier that week, and based on the weather forecast, he had a feeling the remains would be buried soon. But when he got to the cemetery that day, he was forced to watch the burial from behind a locked gate.
And there was tractors and big trucks and work people, and they was busy. They were unloading the boxes off of the truck, and there was a person down in the hole, and he was handing them the boxes. And they saw me, and I said something so that I wanted them to see me. And so when they saw me, one of the work persons ran to one of the big trucks that was parked back in that area. And he got in the truck, and he was coming up this way. And so I didn't know what was going on. So I went back towards my car. And what he did, he just parked the big truck here so I could no longer have the view that I had, okay? That same day, I already had a meeting planned with some people, some UGA faculty for lunch. And so after I left here, I went there and I was telling them, and I won't say that they didn't believe me, but they didn't want to believe me. They didn't want to believe that UGA was burying them in that manner without notice. Because one thing that we had said to the UGA officials, we asked them not to do that, to let us be present when they reburied them and let us be part of the solemn moment, so to speak.
It feels like a sacred or ritual or something that should have been, we should have been allowed to observe that, and we should have been allowed to try and connect with our ancestry during that process. But of course that all happened under the privacy of the university's construction thing.
I'm taken back by them not being a little bit more creative with it, and not taking the time to try to locate descendants of those people. I understand they probably was afraid that it would stir up a whole lot of ruckus, but the ruckus has been stirred up anyway. So you didn't get around that.
In response to criticism, the university released a letter from the state archaeologist's office, which stated their original guidelines and affirmed that the university had followed them accordingly.
For some reason, I know it's just a PR technique. They want to talk about that they followed the procedure from the state archaeology department, whatever. No one has questioned whether or not they did that. Our concern is that what they did was disrespectful.
Community members and faculty have also been critical of the university's justification that, based on historical accounts, both Old Athens Cemetery and Oconee Hill Cemetery were biracial from their inception.
Biracial is I think a kind of vague term, and one of the things we underscore as historians is that you need to be precise with your terminology. So biracial can mean lots of different things.
Jackson was biracial just like Oconee Hill was, in the sense that there was an area over there where black folks was buried, and there was an area in this cemetery that they had designated for slaves to be buried. That's the biracial part. There was not people buried together.
You really need to contextualize it to understand that in both instances, white Americans are buried in the upper parts of the cemetery and African Americans are put in the lower parts of the cemetery with the less desirable parts. But then it's also the case that African Americans were not welcomed in those cemeteries, and especially in Oconee Hill Cemetery. We know that there was a history of barring African American families from visiting their loved ones.
In fact, local historian Al Hester has recorded that African Americans began using Gospel Pilgrim Cemetery in the 1880s because they were tired of seeing their relatives dug up and paved over at Oconee Hill Cemetery. As many have pointed out, the university reproduced this experience for the African American community at Baldwin Hall. On March 20th, 2017, as planned, the memorial ceremony was held at Oconee Hill Cemetery. Reverend Winfred M. Hope, Federal Judge Steve Jones, and UGA President Jerry Moorhead spoke at the ceremony. In his speech, President Moorhead said everyone shared a deep sense of compassion and respect for the 105 individuals.
From the moment the first remains were discovered in November of 2015, The university's guiding principle has been to treat these individuals with dignity and respect, and it is in that spirit that today's ceremony was developed, and that plans are now underway to further expand our understanding of these individuals. In a moment.
That day, the university also announced plans for further research to learn more about the lives of the 105 individuals whose grave sites were discovered, and they pledged to explore new ways to collaborate in the community on the issues of education and economic development. Notably absent from official statements, however, was any mention of the university's historical involvement in slavery, despite the fact that the remains found under Baldwin Hall could very well belong to former slaves that worked on campus. This begs the question, what does economic development mean to the University of Georgia when it still neglects to acknowledge its history of enslaved labor? For Linda Lloyd, until UGA raises employee wages, it doesn't mean much. As a longtime resident of Athens and executive director of the Economic Justice Coalition, for years Ms. Lloyd has been fighting to get UGA to pay their employees a fair wage.
I remember when we used to come out here every Wednesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock. The protesters were like stretched out from that end to that end. There were probably about anywhere from 50 to 60 students up here, and they had like big signs. The signs were made out of like sheets that had "We love UGA employees," "We appreciate UGA employees," and then they would have something that said, "We're out here advocating for a living wage and health benefits."
Ms. Lloyd has continued that work alongside the United Campus Workers of Georgia, a new labor union on campus. The union is working for equity and respect for the lowest paid members of the community, and the membership is open to anybody who gets a paycheck from UGA. Members of the union are quick to highlight the university's economic influence in Athens.
So UGA is the leading employer in Athens, certainly dominates the local economy, dominates the local culture. At the same time, by no coincidence, the poverty rate, as reported in 2016 in Athens, is 38%. It's astoundingly high.
There's a discourse of fair wage at the University of Georgia that creates the illusion that it's one of the better places to work at the university, or in Athens rather. But what I know is that what means people are taking home through these jobs are still oftentimes not enough for them to provide for their families, not enough for them to put money away for their own kids to then become students at the University of Georgia. And that's telling me that this isn't working and that we need something better than this.
Now if people work at University of Georgia, you're not making a living wages, so you're gonna have to have another job. So people are telling me that they are working 60, 70 hours per week just in order to make it with the University of Georgia job.
Within the context of UGA's current labor practices, many community members aren't surprised that throughout the Baldwin Hall issue, the university has not officially recognized its history of slavery.
The only way to characterize it is as a kind of whitewash. It's trying to separate the epic of slavery into some kind of quaint period that ended long ago. Whereas, in fact, if we look around the Athens community, it's pretty clear that oppressive labor practices and racialized labor practices have persisted from the days of slavery through the days of Jim Crow into the present.
Because now what I say with the employees that do not make a living wage and health benefits, that they are working for slave wages. So in a sense, it's a kind of a slavery.
So we have to understand that the generational wealth that has built and the generational esteem that has built around this university has always been tied to Black generational poverty that is still with us. So the wealth that is in the system and has been growing at compound interest for over 150 years goes along with generational poverty that is still in the system. So when the university was founded and on through the 20th century, Black people were cleaning up after white people, and to this day, Black people are cleaning up after white people at poverty wages. And we can't pretend that it's an accident.
When you take a closer look at the numbers, it's clear that the university is not committed to economic development for everyone. The UGA Factbook reports that out of all UGA employees, 12% identify as African American or Black. Breaking it down by occupation, Black people make up a small percentage of the administration, accounting for 7% of UGA administrators. Looking at UGA faculty, Black people make up a similar percentage, accounting for 5% of faculty members. But when you look at who makes up the lowest paid employees, the service and maintenance workers, Black people make up 44% of these workers at the University of Georgia. And there's a big difference between the salaries for maintenance workers and administrators. The median salary for service and maintenance workers is just over $27,000 per year. In the meantime, UGA administrators are making over $144,000 per year.
We want to say that the administrators are able to make $144,000 a year because the maintenance workers make only $24,000 a year. And in a well-ordered world, the maintenance workers wouldn't be subsidizing the administrators' pay. Because, and I think Martin Luther King said this very well, the janitor at the hospital is worth just as much as the surgeon, because if the janitor doesn't do his job, that means there are germs around and the patient gets sick. So we need someone cleaning up after the university.
I don't want to believe that people don't see the value and dignity of the work that is done by employees of the University of Georgia, but I can't help but feel like that's true when people are complacent to let folks go home with this kind of wage in their pocket, and so resistant to increasing the wages, forever passing the buck on to someone else or some other office, rather than really sitting down and talking about what it would take and what it would mean for this to happen.
In the months following the reinterment at Oconee Hill Cemetery, UGA's Office of Vice President for Research reviewed research proposals from faculty. On May 25, 2017, the Vice President for Research, Dr. David Lee, announced the university's sponsorship of a two-pronged research project. Dr. Margaret Madden led one part of the project, creating a dynamic time series visualization of the landscape surrounding Baldwin from the 1800s to the present. Dr. Lori Reitzma, an anthropology professor, led the initial phase of the DNA analysis and hopes to help facilitate another phase that would allow community members to connect with their ancestry. But a proposal for a center on slavery, which would have taken a more structural approach to documenting and displaying the university's historical involvement in slavery, was denied. According to Dr. Lee, the proposal was not relevant to the research at Baldwin Hall, and it was also beyond the scope of resources available. Faculty from the history department had also made a request to the provost's office that UGA join the consortium of universities studying slavery, a large group of universities working to address the legacy of slavery in the U.S. Faculty never heard back on the request. That summer, more Athens community members and organizations, including Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement and the Athens NAACP, began calling on the university to redress the harms caused by its historical involvement in slavery and to compensate the community for financial benefits gained from slavery. In June, Athens NAACP President Sheats sent President Moorhead a formal letter requesting scholarships for descendants of enslaved people that worked at UGA.
There's a check long overdue. It might be Bitcoin by the time we get through running around with this thing, but nevertheless, there's a compensation long overdue. And whether it be Bitcoin or a paper check, hard cash is long overdue.
In the letter, the Athens NAACP requested full scholarships for descendants of slaves who worked at UGA, and also for African American high school students in Athens. Morehead responded with a letter stating that the university would be unable to grant race-based scholarships because of constitutional and statutory provisions.
We're not talking about race-based. We're talking about the descendants of those who you benefited from, or who the university benefited from, by their blood, sweat, and tears. From my sources, I thought that I would get a better response from President Morehead. I understand that he has to possibly take whatever decision he makes to the Board of Regents for it to be seriously considered. However, I was very disappointed with the letters because it pretty much just says it's not going to happen, long story short.
As Mr. Sheats alluded to, the University of Georgia operates under the purview of the Georgia Board of Regents, a 19-member board appointed by the Georgia governor that oversees education policy for the 26 schools in the university system of Georgia. The 19-member board, which is primarily composed of wealthy white executives, includes one member who is African American, Sarah Elizabeth Reed. According to President Morehead, UGA has been working closely with the Board of Regents throughout the management of the Baldwin Hall issue. The 2017 fall semester went by without much news of Baldwin Hall, but that would change in 2018. Over the course of the spring 2018 semester, university faculty from multiple departments and student leaders from the Student Government Association took several steps to address community concerns following the Baldwin Hall expansion. But these faculty and student efforts were met with pushback from administration. Early in the semester, SGA Senators Jessica Douglas, Jada Steele, and several others authored a resolution calling on UGA to construct a permanent monument on North Campus dedicated to all enslaved peoples held and employed by the University of Georgia. But before the resolution was even presented to the Senate, Arthur Tripp, a senior staff assistant to President Morehead, arranged to meet with authors of the resolution. At the meeting, Tripp pulled up a draft of their resolution on his computer and began to critique it, line by line. Senators said this was highly unusual, since SGA is supposed to operate independently from the administration.
The message that he got across was definitely that our legislation came off as adversarial and that we had sort of portrayed the administration as almost an enemy of our cause.
Douglas and others, determined to pass the resolution, toned down some of the language, secured support from Black student leaders and organizations, and pushed it through. The SGA Senate passed the resolution in April 2018. But about a week later, outgoing SGA President Cameron King vetoed the resolution due to factual incongruencies. King stated that the resolution included the student organization Georgia Days as a supporter, when in fact they weren't.
So with this student organization that ended up rescinding their support, we originally got their support from one member of the exec board who was the treasurer. And I think when other exec members found out about it, they immediately went to their advisors and were like, hey, what's this gonna look like? And I was told that the advisor literally said, what would white students think walking past a slave memorial on campus? And that if President Morehead found out, he could take away the funding for that organization, if they were involved in something controversial.
The administration did not take kindly to faculty efforts either. In February 2018, the Franklin College Faculty Senate, an elected group of faculty representing the largest college on campus, began a serious discussion about the university's response to the Baldwin Hall expansion. In their March meeting, they heard from Fred Smith Sr. and Linda Davis and discussed a list of ways that the university could work together with the African American community going forward. News coverage of their critical discussion caught the attention of administration, and on March 22nd, university spokesperson Greg Trevor responded with a statement to the Athens Banner Herald. In the statement, Trevor doubled down on the university's defense. Treating the remains with dignity and respect was our primary concern and commitment from the very first discovery at the construction site, and we have never wavered in our resolve, Trevor wrote. In the article, he also calls out junior faculty member Dr. Reitzma and states that it is a shame that some would now endeavor to mislead the campus and local community to believe otherwise. Soon after, the history department responded with a statement of their own. They wrote that we, like so many at UGA and in Athens, have been sorrowed by our university's repeated missteps in dealing with the Baldwin site, and the opinion piece was certainly one of them. They also announced their commitment to investigating the university's history of slavery. At their April meeting, the Franklin College Faculty Senate continued their discussion and appointed an ad hoc committee to examine the concerns held by faculty regarding the Baldwin Hall expansion. The ad hoc committee also committed to provide a report on how faculty can address UGA's legacy of slavery and UGA's current relationship to the African American community in Athens. On May 9, 2018, with community concern mounting, a brown bag panel was held at the Linden House Arts Center for UGA officials to update the public on research efforts and hear grievances from residents and faculty. Fred Smith Sr., Linda Davis, Dr. Lori Reitzma, UGA Chief Diversity Officer Dr. Michelle Cook, and Vice President for Research Dr. David Lee each spoke on the panel. At the event, several faculty members spoke out to share their experience with feeling pressured by administration.
But it's not lost on me the way that the university administration has responded to people who are actually doing research, and the way that it has paralyzed people and stopped people from even participating in documentary
honest with you to say that I am not aware of any administrator who has actually done that. I have heard that there has been that feeling and that perception. What I would be very open to having a conversation with any faculty member who has been told to cease and desist in their research. That is not, we are a Research One institution. We're committed to that and to the academic freedom of our faculty. And that is the position of the university. If there is some pressure that faculty are feeling in regards to any specific type of research, that is something that should be brought to the provost's office.
Okay.
There was someone in the back here.
And I know the Tamworth administration, they try to exercise pressure on people when they don't like what they say. I have experience with that. And so I would just personally say that I don't dismiss that at all. It just happened to me as a senior chair, professor, tenure. Okay? But from the very beginning, I had asked prior that the president get out in front of this and talk to the community, African American community, and essentially try to work something out. And this was relatively early on. I was asked by someone for advice. I gave advice. Not a damn thing happened. All right? So, in other words, where is the president?
Dr. Cook and Dr. Lee were also asked if UGA would join the consortium of universities studying slavery.
I mean, I made a request, I sent it through the provost's office about that like 3 years ago. Never heard back on it. Should the university be involved in that consortium?
I do not know, I'll be perfectly honest, I do not know enough about the consortium and the work of the consortium to know if this would be something that the university should engage in. I don't have a predisposition against it in any way, so I would definitely be able to look at it and have a conversation with the provost.
The meeting concluded with a passionate call for more action from administration.
Louder? Yeah, I'm calling publicly. I don't have a chair, they'll never give me one now. And I'm calling publicly for the University of Georgia to commit to joining the consortium, to setting up a center, and to establishing scholarships for descendants, qualified descendants of enslaved persons enslaved on the UGA campus.
The University of Georgia was forced to respond to community pressure from the Brown Bag event, the SGA resolution, and the public statements made by faculty. 3 weeks later, on May 31st, 2018, they released a statement announcing the construction of a memorial on the front lawn of Baldwin Hall. According to UGA, the granite memorial would serve as a place of remembrance for the individuals who were originally buried on this site in the 1800s, most of whom likely were slaves or former slaves. Located near one of the busiest intersections on campus, the memorial would become the university's most pronounced acknowledgement of slavery. However, none of the Athens elders who were most outspoken about the Baldwin Hall expansion, not Mr. Smith, nor Ms. Davis, nor Mr. Sheats, were included in the 18-person task force that President Moorhead appointed to plan the monument. Their absence from the task force was reflected in the language chosen for the marker. As Mr. Smith pointed out in an article featured in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the marker does not mention the people still buried underneath Baldwin Hall and the parking lot, nor the people who were unearthed and moved back when the building was originally built. It also avoids any mention that the university was ever involved with slaves and slavery. On the morning of November 16, 2018, UGA held a memorial ceremony to unveil the new monument at Baldwin Hall. University administrators, remaining consistent with their previous statements and actions, did not use the memorial ceremony as an opportunity to recognize the school's historical involvement in slavery. In fact, the scheduled speakers, President Moorhead, Dr. Cook, and Judge Steve Jones, did not mention the word slave or slavery once during the ceremony. However, these voices weren't the only ones that were heard that morning.
Dedication at the university and in the Athens community, as we will remember, celebrate, and honor the individuals who were originally buried here. And I will now call on Judge Jones for his remarks. Thank you.
This is the material reality that is going on here. This is the material reality. You don't get to just,
During the ceremony, a group of community organizers, including Athens community members, UGA students, staff, and Athens Clarke County District 2 Commissioner Mariah Parker, interrupted President Moorhead to ask that the university address its history of slavery. They highlighted how the proposal for a center on slavery was deemed outside the scope of resources, while recent stadium renovations amounted to $63 million. And they held signs that asked the university to tell the whole story, enact reparational scholarships, and pay fair wages to its employees. After the speeches, Moorhead was asked again directly.
President Moorhead, when will UGA address its history of slavery?
I'm here for the memorial today. Thank you.
But when will UGA address its history of slavery? Will the administration address its history of slavery? Are you just going to neglect it?
About 10 minutes later, he made his exit, while community members stuck around to chat and learn some history from Mr. Smith.
We've been telling this story for years, you know, in my family, in those circles, right?
Yeah, and that's a story that UGA needs to be telling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Somebody suggested that a building needs to be named after somebody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. At the minimum.
About a month after the ceremony, Mr. Smith shared his thoughts on the memorial.
At least now there is this structure here to acknowledge the enslaved persons who are buried here, and some acknowledgement of their existence and their contribution. So I feel much better than I felt before this happened, before it was constructed. And of course, like I say, this is not the
the whole story. This doesn't end the story about enslaved persons at UGA. It doesn't end the story about former workers. It doesn't end the story about those persons who are still buried here. But again, this is a significant monument. It's highly visible from the street, and so a historical site for people to visit when they come to this town. Some of them who are interested in history and African American history in particular will probably come and take a look at this and have some solemn moments here as they reflect about those times in the life of those individuals.
As winter turns to spring in 2019, students, faculty, and community members are continuing to push the issue forward. Like Mr. Smith, many community members consider the memorial a victory and at the same time are adamant that the University of Georgia has a lot left to do in the realms of recognition and redress. Recognition of its history of slavery and redress for the ways that history lives on today.
I believe one of the most critical forms of redress is reparational scholarships for descendants of slaves or Black people of African descent who live here in Athens. Currently, Clark County school system is about 50% students of color. Only 1% of them end up going to the University of Georgia.
So we need to talk about it as a racial problem, we need to talk about it as a labor problem and how the two are combined in the Black body in the South. So we will not be made whole as Black people in the South until we get our racial politics right, that means reparations, and our labor politics right. That means good jobs with strong unions at fair wages.
Justice would be where everyone could have a living wage job, health benefits, and then they would have a work environment where the people could speak freely between management and the workers. And, people would just be happy. That's what it would look like to me. A beginning anyway, yeah.
This is a grand opportunity for the University of Georgia to really come out and stand up and really be accountable and be a much more loving and embracing educational facility. And I don't think you could ask for anything more than for the Georgia Bulldogs to set the precedence for the rest of the nation. I'd like to see us lead the way in making restitutions to those descendants of slaves.
End game to actually be brave and do the hard work and contribute the resources to really talking about the way we can fix these problems and owning up to the history of the school's involvement in producing these issues will only make everybody stand out as a model for how universities should be in the future. But right now, people are a little too scared to take that plunge.
And it all goes back to the story that is not told. So if we would ever rewrite history and write it equitably and write it owning our past, then I think we have a beginning place to start understanding what a future together looks like. Until then, we live in a Jim Crow world.
Here today to read and deliver a public letter to the University of Georgia, President Jerry Moorhead.
Despite your administration's continued efforts to literally and figuratively bury the university's legacy of slavery, the current social and economic conditions in Athens make this legacy impossible to ignore.
We call on the University of Georgia to fund and celebrate efforts to recognize and redress its full history in 3 specific ways.
First, issue a public statement taking responsibility for UGA's role in white supremacy and fully fund the faculty-proposed Center on Slavery as a first step toward researching and telling the whole story of UGA's role in slavery and black oppression, a legacy which persists to this day.
Second, guarantee full tuition, all fees included, scholarships for descendants of the enslaved people who worked on UGA's campus, and for every African American student who graduates from a public high school in Athens as a first step toward redressing the long-standing reparational debt that UGA owes to the African American community and the local public schools in Athens.
Lastly, implement wages of at least $15 an hour for all full-time and part-time temporary UGA employees as a first step towards sufficiently supporting workers, especially black workers who are disproportionately underpaid at UGA. As the largest employer in Athens and the flagship university in Georgia, UGA sets a standard for wages across the community and the state. The current inadequate wages fuel poverty in Athens' black communities, and UGA must do more to address the massive racial wealth gap.
These demands chart a course for UGA to confront and take responsibility for its complicity in slavery and the enduring harm it inflicts on black community members, staff, faculty, and students today.
We, the undersigned, stand united in these demands until they are met, and we will continue to fight until we achieve full recognition and redress for this legacy of harm.
And with that, we'd like to invite President Moorhead and his fellow administrators to publicly respond to these three requests on April 24th, when we will be holding a town hall that we are calling the Reparations Now Town Hall. President Moorhead, you've heard from the Athens community on countless occasions. As a sign of good faith, we're giving you one last chance to listen and to act on our three requests.
Jerry Moorhead, wherever you are, here's your small group of local activists. Woo! And we will keep coming back.
And that's on
keep
period.
Fighting for this.
Yes!
Yes! Because people are saying, you know, why now? Why so soon? This has been 400 years in the making.
Yes!
This has been And people are out here, we're just trying to get folks' basic needs met. We have people that are working at this university, then going to second jobs and still trying to feed their families.
Yes. Yes.
That is not right. Y'all know it's not right.
No.
Right. So it's just like at the end of the day, we just need to stop the games, and it's time to get moving on some material changes happening in this community.
Yes.
The administration and the local government, we can work something out to where we don't have nearly 40% poverty in this community.
Yes.
Hey y'all, any questions of me? Anything you need to ask me about the process?
Just to be clear one more time, the meeting has not been scheduled,
At this point, what we're dealing with is exclusively this aspect of it.
so the meeting hasn't been scheduled.
This is all I'm dealing with now. Okay, so here's the way it goes from this point. Please ask me if you have any questions. I'm going to go to individuals, and I'm going to explain what is going on, the ramifications of that, and each person will have an individual discussion with me that we will film. Yeah, and that's all there is to it. Everybody that is currently still in the building who is not an employee is subject to arrest. So it doesn't matter if it's... Okay.
Did the Q&A portion pass?
Ma'am.
Or we still have the Q&A portion?
If you have a question, yeah, go ahead and ask me. All I'm answering though is about the process of where we are now. Nothing else. So we can talk
Do you
about
sleep well?
About the law.
Doing this work? You can't, that has nothing to do with the process, it's just an individual question.
You can ask me about what's going on right now, that's all I'm going to answer.
Are you a human being or a robot? What is this? You can't answer how you feel about this process. How you feel about this country.
Okay. So, barring that, no questions about the process? What I'll do...
No, I'm clear on the process, sir. I'm always subject to arrest.
Okay, well, we are.
So thanks.
You would give your camera to somebody else? Are you choosing to leave?
Is that your bag?
Sorry, is your bag?
Yeah, can you bring that up?
Wait.
We'll be back. We'll be back. We'll be back.
Do you mind getting my bag from me?
We'll be back. We'll be back. We'll be back.
Do you have a degree in higher education?
Yes, ma'am. I have 2 degrees from this institution, as a
Well,
matter of fact.
that is
That's a
great.
shame that they've
Don't
gone
you
to
think
waste
that,
like
that did they teach you that you send the police to interface with students when they have questions?
Ma'am, we're here to make sure that what you guys are trying to do is handled in the way that you asked for. You have
We're
reservations
not trying
for
to
your
have
space.
lunch inside.
Okay.
The picnic is over there. We're
If-
trying to
if you-
enter
if
the
you guys,
administrative
If you guys
building.
have anything that you would like me to take into the building, I would be happy to do
You
that.
do understand the optics of you, white man, telling us black students that we cannot enter the administrative
Ma'am,
building.
I'm
Are
not
we
gonna-
returning
I'm
into
not
the
gonna
ages
get-
of
I'm
segregation?
not
We
gonna
are not
get into
able
that
to
topic.
come into this building, is what you're telling me?
That is correct. This
We are not
building-
able to
this
come into the
building-
administrative
yes,
building
ma'am,
at
that
the
is-
university where we pay
that is what I'm
tuition
telling you right
to
now.
attend at the university.
Sorry, why are we paying $50,000 a
This
year for
building is not
administrators to
designed
ignore us
for
and
expressive
the
activity.
There
guys.
is no expressive activity happening.
You did not have an all the time. I don't want anybody to be surprised, so what Officer Appleby is going to do is reach around you, and she's going to close the door. You have to get out of the way. That's all.
No, the building isn't closed.
This is a
We're not
public
leaving.
building.
We're
Why-
just trying to
why
request
is
a
it
meeting.
public?
Hey,
It's a
let me
public
ask you,
building.
Dan. Dan, let me ask you. How did you hear back from administration when we requested a meeting on Monday? Did you hear back?
There's avenues to pursue that.
Why can't this be
We've
one?
pursued those avenues.
Every avenue that
Hey,
we've
did
pursued
you
has
hear
told us
back
to
from
pursue somebody
administration?
else.
Dan, Chief Silk, did you hear back from administration?
Move.
No, you didn't hear back?
Move, guys.
Hey, we're just trying to request a meeting.
Close the door.
All we're trying to do is request a meeting.
Come Connie, you face going to jail for obstruction. It's not listening.
We're going to jail?
What laws?
We're going to jail for entering a public building.
You're initiating violence.
This is unbelievable.
State is issuing violence.
Nobody's creating it but you.
Unbelievable. Unfucking.
We haven't done anything violent.
Notice what is going on in your body. Notice your breath. The way your abdomen rises and falls as you inhale and exhale. Rather than trying to change your breath, simply notice it for a moment. Now, focus on your mind. Allow your thoughts to flow through your mind. Notice your thoughts as if they were clouds passing by. Rather than trying to focus on a thought, let it come and go.